Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you, albeit virtually here from Newport. Next slide. Sam already covered the disclaimer, but just a reminder that the views expressed here this afternoon are my own. Now, my contribution to the panel is looking at the issue of technology and strategy from a practitioner's perspective. Next slide, please. In my view, the recent Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan and the ongoing war in Ukraine have really changed the game with respect to the efficacy of unmanned systems on the modern battlefield. Due to the tactical, operational, and strategic opportunities and vulnerabilities presented by advanced technology, as well as the rapid pace of change, the Department of Defense/Department of War has requested increased budgetary resources and authorities, as well as more flexibility to engage with private industry in a growth area that spans across all domains. This includes the Pentagon's creation of a Joint Interagency Task Force, or JIATF, for counter-unmanned autonomous systems operations. Combatant commands are also leaning forward, as demonstrated by U.S. Central Command's component-level innovative task forces that test and field unmanned systems and AI capabilities to address the emerging needs of the warfighter, especially in the maritime domain. CENTCOM itself recently formed the Rapid Employment Joint Task Force to speed up the delivery of drones and other technologies for troops and formations within the larger command. Now, these events have also led to discussions about future force structure, the trade-offs and the choices, specifically the continued utility and vulnerability of legacy systems like tanks and artillery. Now, ironically, in some ways, unmanned technology such as first-person view or FPV drones has brought the battlefield back to World War I era trench warfare because of their ubiquity and lethality. Moreover, Ukraine has degraded the Russian Navy fleet, even though it doesn't have a Navy, using unmanned surface vehicles and other assets. And so the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East have also increased the demand for air and missile defense and other defensive capabilities to reduce vulnerability on the modern battlefield. This will only be a continuous challenge as technology improves in the future. Now, having described both the opportunities and vulnerabilities that technology offers, let's return to the topic of strategy. Next slide, please. First, a warning not to confuse ends with ways and means. By this, I mean that we control the use of technology and not the other way around. By constantly seeking technology as an end itself, we risk overlooking the broader aims of national strategy and how it advances one's national interests and strategic objectives. Now, some have argued that we've been here before, right? The United States has been kind of categorized as having a historic strategic culture of leveraging technology to overwhelm its adversaries. Next slide, please. From the post-Desert Storm happy talk of a revolution in military affairs in the 1990s, which would somehow reduce the Clausewitzian fog and friction of war by presenting a series of time-sensitive dilemmas that impact the adversary's decision-making cycle, to then Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld's transformation initiative in the early 2000s that leveraged technology to significantly reduce the number of required troops in the joint force, to a series of so-called offset strategies that I'll describe soon. The United States has a long-standing focus on harnessing the tactical, operational, and strategic benefits of technology. Now, one of the questions before this panel is how best to do this. Next slide, please. In my classes at the Naval War College and the National Security Affairs Department, I've been teaching this logic of force planning that you see here for many years. Although the slide shows a clean, linear process, as we all know, strategy development is more iterative and certainly more complicated in practice. Most often affected by changes in the security environment, the threats and opportunities, as well as resource constraints, largely as a consequence of domestic political systems, such as the guns versus butter debate. At the risk of incurring the wrath of the late Colin Powell, Vernon Clark, and others included on Sam's earlier slide, this logic depicts a top-down, strategy-driven approach where the budget is applied downstream. Now, although the graphic implies a series of necessary steps to produce strategy-informed budgets, we've already heard the argument that the real process is a strategy based entirely on the budget and fiscal considerations. Next slide, please. Fair enough. But the four defense resource allocation processes shown on this slide are intentionally designed to be strategy-driven. Now, I won't bore you by explaining the intricacies of the processes themselves, but the main point, as Sam said, that the National Defense Strategy and the National Military Strategy are very influential documents that drive concept development, capability requirements, and defense acquisition programs. Which brings us to the question, where does technology fit? Should technology drive strategy? Again, I think the logic of force planning can be instructive. Next slide, please. Now, regarding assessment, the first step in the logic, technology introduces a host of challenges and opportunities. For example, the low bar to entry for technology, such as AI and unmanned systems, will enable both state and non-state actors to achieve significant tactical, operational, and strategic effects on the modern battlefield. I'm also concerned that we don't take our eye off the necessary investment in low-tech anti-drone defenses, as these technologies only mature and adapt. Meanwhile, concept development must envision new and creative ways to incorporate this advanced technology into the joint force while remaining cognizant of the interoperability challenges for our partners. Concepts also help guide answers to the questions, what do we want the technology to do, and who are we doing it with? In my view, this is a critical step where concept-driven capabilities can demonstrate how the joint force can integrate new technology in order to achieve the ends or objectives of our strategy. Moreover, war games and simulations allow these concepts to be tested under various and vigorous scenarios to stress their feasibility. Concepts also produce capability requirements or the means of strategy that will function effectively in that future security environment. Finally, technology offers a way to mitigate risk, both in terms of human casualties and cost of equipment. To that end, we must encourage engagement with private industry and push the industrial base to develop and deliver capabilities that emerge from these concepts. We must also change the laborious, bureaucratic nature of the acquisition process to accommodate the speed of technological change. That said, prudence demands that the process still remains rigorous and avoid simply chasing the latest technological fad. The Trump administration and the Pentagon have already taken steps in this direction. Next slide, please. For example, in April, President Trump directed the Department of War and the services to reform and modernize their acquisition processes and spur innovation within the defense industrial base. Secretary Pete Hegseth subsequently announced the elimination of the Joint Capabilities Integration or Development System, or JCIDS, deeming that process too slow and instead transferring the requirements determination function to the services themselves. His recently announced acquisition reforms include the replacement of program and executive offices with portfolio acquisition executives. Now, while critics may argue that this is nothing more than some bureaucratic swapping of deck chairs, this change actually provides the new PAEs with greater approval authority to speed up the process. Finally, he directed the creation of the aforementioned JIAD 401 to better align counter-UAS authority and resources, again, in order to more quickly deliver capabilities. The Secretary also gave this new organization authority to make its own direct procurement decisions of up to $50 million, again, emphasizing speed over process. Now, each of these initiatives has the effect of cutting red tape and facilitating closer coordination between the defense industrial base, private industry, and the War Department. Here, the aforementioned third offset strategy that was championed by former Deputy Secretary of Defense Robert O'Rourke and others is instructive. Next slide, please. For context, the first offset was the advent of nuclear weapons. The second offset focused on the development of precision munitions. These were very transformative technologies that significantly impacted the development of strategy and force structure to this very day. Now, among other things, the third offset strategy was focused on networks and technological leaps in AI and autonomous systems by adversaries. The strategy sought to find ways to reorganize the War Department, to work with civilian partners in Silicon Valley and elsewhere to reimagine the defense industrial base for the future. The offset strategy would also inspire a number of subsequent initiatives, including the development of the joint warfighting concept and service concepts that operationalize technological advances against competitors like China. In sum, the Pentagon has clearly embraced the military applications that technology provides and has poured enormous resources into this effort. For example, the fiscal year 2025 defense budget request included $143 billion for research, development, testing, and experimentation, or RDT&E. This included roughly $18 billion for science and technology, and another $2 billion specifically for artificial intelligence. So full steam ahead on quickly developing and acquiring technology of all types. That includes the recent announcement that the Army will procure and field at least 1 million drones within the next 3 years, while at the same time cutting some 6,500 active duty aviation positions. That said, I'm reminded of the caution, if you want it bad, you will often get it bad. Next slide, please. In this case, I'm concerned that technology, specifically the allure of AI decision support systems, aided target recognition, and fully autonomous weapon systems as some kind of magical elixir, not replace critical thinking and human judgment and decision-making. Whether ethics or common sense, there are currently limits to machine learning that must be considered. Some of you may recall the 1983 movie War Games as a creative Hollywood example about the vulnerabilities of technology. In this case, a bored teenager hacked into a military supercomputer in search of video games, and a series of subsequent events unfolded that led to the threat of thermonuclear war. I'm pretty confident that none of us want these types of Hollywood movies coming to life anytime soon. And this is one argument of many for technology enabling strategy and not the other way around. At the end of the day, Clausewitz reminds us that the character of war may change, but the nature of war remains constant, a clash of human wills. Another argument is resourcing. Programming and budget challenges include affordability and building to scale. Again, scalability. After all, having the most exquisite systems, but in insufficient numbers, is both limiting and self-defeating. Moreover, we have to remain mindful of the asymmetric nature of technology, where mass attacks of cheap drones can overwhelm expensive systems, as seen in Ukraine, Nagorno-Karabakh, and the Middle East. Regarding the latter, consider the cost of shooting multi-million-dollar standard missiles in the Red Sea against Houthi drones and missiles that are a fraction of that cost. This also raises serious concerns about the defense industrial base keeping up with expenditure rates of these low-density, high-demand missile systems and missile defense systems. I also worry that the U.S. becomes enmeshed in some kind of technology security dilemma, where the zeal to be first in advanced autonomous systems and other technology actually incentivizes taking shortcuts that actually increase risk to the force. This highlights another element of strategy, risk and risk mitigation. Specifically, we need to understand our vulnerability in over-relying on technology. How prepared is the joint force to fight in a degraded environment where access to technological systems is hindered or denied through either direct attack or supply chain disruptions? Can these forces effectively fight in a degraded environment? How many soldiers and sailors can navigate without using GPS? Do we even have analog systems anymore, or operators that know how to use them? The good news lies in the adaptation and initiative of quality junior officers and non-commissioned officers that understand, train, and continue to execute mission command regardless of the circumstances. So in conclusion, technology is here to stay and will only get exponentially better over time. And while technology may not be an end in itself, we need to recognize and appreciate the threats and opportunities it provides. Moreover, professional military education institutes like the Naval War College can and should continue to embrace technology and teach our students to more effectively use and incorporate these powerful tools in operational and strategic planning and in other endeavors. And with that, I'll conclude and say thank you very much.